Hi, I'm Teresa Caraway, and I'm founder and CEO of Hearing First. And welcome to our Facebook Ask Me Anything Live. We're broadcasting live from Midtown Manhattan,
right.
and it can be a very noisy place. So we'll find out if there's any special sirens or trucks that go by, and we'll be sure and point that sound out.
That's right.
But at Hearing First, a little bit about Hearing First. And at Hearing First, we believe that every family needs to know the status of their baby's hearing first, because all child development hinges on that.
Yes.
And so we want families to know the importance of newborn hearing screening, of following up quickly if their baby refers or fails that newborn hearing screening, so that we can make sure that brain has access to sound and to language for it to learn and grow, and for every child to reach their full potential. But, you know, one of the things that is important is that most people don't realize that babies and children who are deaf or hard of hearing are learning to listen and talk every single day. And so today we're going to be discussing how the brain uses sound during the early cognitive development and how it influences that and the importance of it. And I'm here today with Lydia Denworth, and she's a friend, but she's also a mom of 3 boys.
Right.
She's a science writer, and she has written a book that I have really benefited from and have thoroughly enjoyed.
Thank you.
And that is I Can Hear You Whisper.
Right.
And you really have taken the time to do a thorough investigation of how sound and impacts the brain and is the ground and influences reading and listening and spoken language. So we're going to be talking a little bit more about that.
That's right.
But I mentioned that you're a mom, you're an author, you're a science writer, and the list could go on. But most important, you're a mom.
Yes.
And I'd like to focus on a mom of Alex.
Right.
And tell us a little bit about Alex.
Thank you. Alex is the youngest of my 3 boys. He's now 14, so he's in 9th grade. But we're really here to talk about when he was little and what it was like to be a mother discovering that my child couldn't hear. And for me, as for a lot of parents of deaf and hard of hearing kids, my son Alex was the first deaf and hard of hearing child that I ever really knew.
Yeah.
So even though he was my 3rd child and I thought I knew what I was doing as a parent, I really didn't know what it was to parent a child who couldn't hear very well.
Yeah. So it set you forth on a whole journey, didn't it?
Changed my life in multiple ways.
And you're very much like in the situation of most parents. 94% of babies that are born deaf or hard of hearing are born to 2 hearing parents.
That's right.
So it comes to them out of the blue.
Right.
So through your journey, what were some key takeaways that you learned as you journeyed early years with Alex?
Well, I would say that the number one most important thing was understanding that hearing is not just about the ears. You know, when he was an infant and I was just beginning to have these hearing tests, I would look at his ears in his crib and think that it was all about the ears. And then I came to understand it's about the brain, right?
Yes.
It just begins with the ears. And that's where my science writer sort of persona kicked in, was I began to think that there was a larger story here. And that's why so I wrote the book. I mean, in a way, I was writing this book from the minute Alex was born. I just didn't know it, right? That's how. But, you know, it's all about what happens in a child's brain in those early days, weeks, months, years. And so knowing how quickly you need to act and understanding that there's nothing to be gained from waiting if you're worried about a child, or if you've just had a child identified with hearing loss, was really, I would say, the most important understanding, and how much we take sound for granted in our lives until we can't.
Right. So don't wait.
Don't wait.
Act urgently.
Right.
Because babies begin to learn day one and
Day
even
one.
in the womb.
Right.
But it's
Right.
critical that they have access to sound from day one and
That's
to act
right.
quickly.
That's right.
So
Yeah.
we look forward to answering your questions today, and we invite you to submit your comments below the video feed, and we'd love to hear those.
Right.
You know, one of the things, actually, Lydia, that I think that I enjoyed from your work and from my professional experience as well is what's important about parent-child interactions, and what would you say to parents as a first beginning point of things they can do to help their child?
I mean, there's nothing more important than the parent-child interaction, really, because that is everything a child does is feeding a baby's brain. And we sort of know that, but I don't think we deeply appreciate it.
Yeah.
And like I said, it's easy to take things for granted. So what it really means is that if everything that happens to a child is being etched into their brain, then you have to add. You have to be explicit. You have to narrate their world, and you have to. And you can make a game of it, and you can. It doesn't have to be a boring lecture every day, right?
Yeah.
But repetition, and more input for kids. That's of course once they have access to sound. But even if you think they don't, you don't know what they're getting, and they're taking in everything.
Right.
So don't. And the other thing is you want to be in a good habit of talking to that child all the time.
Yeah.
So start from the beginning, even if you know that they're really not hearing
Right,
anything,
yeah.
so that you just develop the habits.
Right, and with the hearing technology that we have today,
Right.
being fit with the technology early so that the brain does have access to sound, then all of those, like you say, narrating becomes etched into that child's brain.
It does. And the thing that's really interesting is that when children learn language, any child, they're learning patterns basically. And it turns out that as you know, I always say that there's a neurobiology to Dr. Seuss basically.
Yes.
He knew what he was doing, either I don't know if he knew for explicitly or he was just guessing, but repetition, rhythm and rhyme, which I call the 3 R's, right? Help to lay down the pathways in kids' brains for language, and then that is going to help lead to reading. And so parents, that's why the way we call it motherese, right? But anybody can do it, fatherese. But that's why that kind of sing-songy voice that we do is actually, it's why it's universal. Every culture, every language in the world, people do that. And it's why poetry and music and things like that are so helpful for kids.
So what I hear you saying is that if learning languages based on learning patterns,
Right.
what a parent can start doing is talking to their child
Yes.
and narrating all their actions and their thoughts,
Right.
singing to their child, making up songs
Absolutely.
and
Doesn't
singing
matter
lots of
if
songs.
you're terrible at singing.
And making up songs maybe as they're doing daily routines,
Right.
about this is the way we put on our shoes, this is the
Right.
way we put on our shirt.
Right. And if you happen to live in New York where you hear honking and sirens, you can say, hey, that was a siren.
So narrating words, singing, but also you mentioned rhyming, and you
Yes,
mentioned
poetry.
Poetry. So those good old-fashioned Mother Goose. Jack and Jill went up the
Hill.
to fetch a pail of water.
Right.
Yeah. And perhaps stopping and pausing and letting the child fill in keywords and phrases. Those types of activities would be good.
And once Alex was a little older and had all his technology in place, we would play rhyming games. We'd say maybe Jack and Jill went up a hill. What rhymes with hill?
There you go.
And so do those kinds of things.
That's great. That's awesome. So, you've done a lot of work about building networks in the brain for reading.
Right.
And so can you tell us a little bit more about how sound is the foundation for laying those
reading.
for reading? Yeah, that'd be great.
I think that's one of the things that's so important is here I was, I didn't understand that deaf and hard of hearing kids struggle to read. And the reason they struggle to read is because they struggle with language. And so it works together, right? Everything's connected in the brain. And so reading turns out to be really based on sound processing in the brain. In fact, that is the major cause for most reading disabilities, including dyslexia. So reading requires that things come in through vision, but then they immediately and quickly move into the language networks of the brain. And the faster that happens, the more efficient that is, the better at reading you're going to be. So you've got to get the audio in first. You've got to get that input in sound first.
Yeah. So really, to be able to hear the differences between sounds,
Right.
to hear the syllables and letters and sounds and words, all of that becomes the foundation of which a child builds little.
Right. I mean,
reading
really,
skills
the
on.
foundation of reading is phonological awareness, which, as you and I know, is picking apart the sounds in your, not phonics, but bigger than that, right? Phrases and syllables and things like that.
So really, if you want to have your child do really well in school, and you're looking at your little baby, the types of things families need to start doing now,
they need to talk, sing, rhyme, right? And they also need to go get information and find other people to talk to. There's so many people out there who have been where you are now, and including me. And it feels enormous, but life is not just what happens to you, it's what happens next and what you do next, right?
That's good advice. So I hear you saying to make sure that quickly you get as much information as you can. And one way to do that is through connections with other families and with
hearing
professionals.
first.
Thank you. And that's why we have a family-to-family support community for families to connect with other families and share their journey and learn from one another, as well as then the website to get accurate and information about if a family has chosen listening and spoken language as an outcome.
Right.
So, I think that it's fascinating of all the things that little brain starts doing immediately. And all. So let's see here. I actually have another question for you.
Sure.
And that is that as families start their journey and as they're thinking about it, what if you knew what you know now, if you would have known then, what would you wish you would have known and done?
How to be short about that?
Yeah, I know, that's a biggie.
I wish that I had figured it out faster, because then we said earlier, nothing is gained by waiting, and time is everything. And so we lost time because I often say that figuring out about Alex's hearing loss was like falling downstairs in slow motion. You've heard me say that, I'm sure, because it was sort of long and it never ended. But so I would just seek to get answers as fast as I can so that I can move on to the next stage, right? And then after that, I think I did okay, but lots of narrating, lots of, and we went aggressively into putting sound in his world. And so that worked for us. That was our choice.
And when you say putting sound in his world, that means that you connected quickly with an audiologist who was provided aggressive audiological management, which means that fitting with hearing technology to provide access to all the sounds.
And you need to have really high expectations for how much they can get out of that technology.
Absolutely. And that's the great thing about technology. You mentioned your son wears a cochlear implant and a hearing aid.
Yes, he does.
And so with the technology we have today, children can have access to all the sounds of speech through their ears, and that helps their brain, and that lays the foundation for reading and
fully
writing.
mainstreamed, and he's getting. He was on the dean's list in 8th grade.
That's very cool. So, okay, I wish that he could have been here today.
I know. Someday we will get Alex to talk to the teenagers.
So tell us about his schooling, and tell us about. I think there was some major transitions you talk about.
Yeah, the big milestones for us, obviously mainstream was a big one. We did start with a preschool that was for kids, especially for kids with hearing loss, because there's so much explicit language that's added kind of from a regular preschool. But when he was 4, he started going to mainstream school, same school that his older brothers go to. And I see, actually, we have a question from Jennifer asking about getting kids to wear their devices every waking hour. I have fought that battle. He once threw his hearing aids into the 7th Avenue path of a bus in Brooklyn, where we live. So, you just keep going, right? I'm sure you all have advice for that too. You just never give up, I think is the answer.
Parents like you, Lydia, and parents like you, Jennifer, and the rest of you out there, is that I always tell parents that by the time they get through with this, we're going to change their middle name to Perseverance. Because it's keeping hearing aids on all waking hours means that you persevere, and you use things like I'm going to say toupee tape or wig tape to keep hearing aids on.
The little snuggies that hold them onto their ears.
And I would advise you, come join the family support community, Jennifer, and ask that question, because there's tons of parents that can give practical advice to you about how to, even more advice than we have maybe time for. So I want to say thank you, Lydia, for being here.
Thank you very much.
Time goes by quickly,
doesn't
it?
And
it does. We could
have
keep
so much
talking
more to
all
say.
day. But if you'd like to learn more about Lydia's work and connect with her, I encourage you to go to her website, lydiadenworth.com, and sign up for her newsletter. That's the best way to stay in contact with all the great science writing that you're doing to learn more. And if you'd like to continue the conversation about listening and spoken language, and about children who are deaf or hard of hearing, and connect with other families, come join our Hearing First family-to-family support community. We'd love to see you there. And if you're a professional, come join our professional learning community as well. But if you'd like to stay connected and up to date on listening and spoken language, come to the website, hearingfirst.org, and sign up for our newsletter. We'd love to stay connected with you in that way. So look forward to connecting with you further online, and I want to say thank you for being here today.